A couple announcements real quick from Belinda.
Thank you. All right, if you all can find your way back to your seat, please. As the children's specialist, as I was listening to Dr. Dew, I was thinking about what we tell preschoolers and younger children at our church, and it's about the Bible, and we say it's God's word to us, and it's true, true, true. So we try to teach them that early on, and we really want to facilitate you on teaching kids the Bible and teaching kids how to know God. And here at the State Board of Missions, I serve as your children's specialist. And at your table, you will see a card that says Kids Link, and this is all things that we do for kids ministry here. So I would ask you, even if you're a pastor or a student leader, there's some things here that might be beneficial to you. It also has a number of events that will be taking place over this next year that you can learn about. One of those that I want to draw your attention to is our Next Gen event, the next one we will have at Westwood Baptist Church in Alabaster. Shelley Melia, who was here 2 years ago for this event from Dallas Baptist College, will be here. Baptist University will be here, and she has contributed to 3 books over this year. One was Shane Pruitt on Gen Alpha. One was several people, one of which is Rhonda Peavy from New Orleans on Children in Salvation. And then another book she contributed, just a chapter on what it's like to be a single mother going to church. So she is a wealth of information. So I hope that you will all make plans to come. We'll also have breakouts there for that. It's not only for church staff, but it's also for your lay leaders as well. So please see me. I would love to meet you, and please know that you can contact us anytime, and we want to facilitate you in any way that we can in helping you lead children to know the Lord and know His Word and know His truth. Thank you.
Hey, can we all thank Belinda for putting all this work in and everything? Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, back to it. We left off after we talked about nature and reality, the metaphysical things. Let's turn to humanity. This is actually one of the really, really big issues. This is probably one, though, that where you would anticipate probably postmodern denials of truth and postmodern moral or ethical types of denials. Most folks probably would not have seen coming what they were saying about humanity itself and its deep, profound implications on our world today. A lot of the madness that we see in this cultural moment about this sexual revolution and all this stuff happening, a lot of this is anchored in a foundational way to what they're doing right here. And then the other one that's going to be a big surprise probably to a lot of people is what they have to say about language. And yes, language is actually a thing, a deeply philosophical type of thing. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so let's talk about humanity for a second. All right, here's the nutshell. And there is, in, again, both of these books, there's actually a chapter in each of these books on this very issue right here. I wrote the chapter in this book, and then I also wrote the chapter in this book. It's a longer version here. It's a shorter, simpler, I think a little cleaner. By the way, yeah, and this one, a little deeper into the pool. This one, not the shallow end, but certainly not the deep end. Maybe the in-between end, okay? That's called moral apologetics. I like the discussion there a little bit better, you know. Anyway, here's the punchline. Postmoderns deny and passionately reject the very concept of human nature. And specifically, the concept, and this sounds weird, the concept of the self. Now, what do we mean when we talk about the self? Well, I might say something like this. Well, I myself think, or you yourself think, all right, time out. When I say yourself or myself, what is that thing we call self right there? There have these little individuals, right? And you think about Jamie Dew, we think about the material body, my brown hair, my beard, my glasses, which are not part of me, glasses aren't, but whatever feature I've got. But then we also think on the non-physical side that there's this center of consciousness. I don't know how else to say it. Like this thing perceiving, knowing, wanting, hoping, believing, loving. You know, that thing. And by the way, in our preaching and in our faith, that thing is the thing that we assume or talk about surviving when the material part goes away, right? And we say about that thing, let's just take a particular person. Let's say Granny. Most of us have lost Granny, right? Granny has passed. We are at the funeral. Granny's body is there. And we say things like, Granny is not here, but Granny is up there. And now, once again, we're getting into mind, body, soul issues, right? But Granny, that thing that was conscious, loving, knowing, relating, thinking, that thing we've thought of throughout our history, as not just Westerners here, by the way, as humanity, we've thought of as a self. All right. Postmoderns are rejecting that concept. They're not denying that you aren't there or that there's not something there, but the self is not some essence, going back to essentialism. The self is not some thing set or fixed or shared in all people at all times across all cultures. There is no one thing called human nature that shows up in all the individual selves, the me's and the you's of the world, right? See, because that's what we think. You're dang right I think this. I do think that there actually is something distinct. The best way for you to see this is for me to just preach for a minute. In Genesis 1, this culmination of creation, all the cool, wonderful, amazing, beautiful things that were made, and of all those things, God did not say what He said about this thing called humanity. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. There was something distinct and definitive in the creation of not just the man, but of the woman. What is this thing called the Imago Dei? Chapter on that in here. What is this thing called the Imago Dei? We tend to think of it as like this sort of seat of rational capacity or these relationships. But you know what? The Bible, the very next thing it says about whatever this thing called the Imago Dei is, the only thing it says next is male and female. Right? So it wasn't just the man that this thing called the Imago Dei shows up in. It was the female as well. And she was like him, different in some ways, in good ways, ways that made Adam say functionally, hubba hubba, right? This is bone of my bone. Yeah, right? He's quite fond of her. He's fond of her because she is different. But what does he say about her? This one now, bone of my bone, flesh of my... She is like me. And there is this likeness, this similitude, this shared essence. No, by the way, we think that that essence shows up in different colors, right? In different people groups, right? Across time, right? They would always look back on their ancestors, right? And those people that are no longer, they're with us in this. And so there is this idea that there's this thing called human nature shared across people, showing up in individual selves. And postmodernism says no to all of that. There is no shared essence, nature, or thing shared by all people at all times. There's only this thing we call the self, but what is that? It's a very fluid thing, capable of being shaped in any number of ways. And so what they're now going to say, this is number 2 under here, that it is social construction and structural power that shapes our view of the self. And you hear this language in our culture today. You hear every time a little girl rejects her gender and tries to transition to being a male, or every time a boy rejects his gender and tries to transition to female, you'll hear them use that language. well, I know the world says I'm this, that, and the other. What they're functionally saying is, the entities, the power structures, I'm expected to be this. That is foisted onto me. It's projected onto me by the religions, by the government, by the culture. And those cultures or those structures, whether that be the church, the academy, government, whatever it is, those power structures are what shape our self-conceptions. And those power structures are always suspect. Therefore, we should not just be fluid. So here's how a person in this mindset really thinks of the self. The self is either going to be shaped by the power influences, or we will throw them off and we will realize for ourselves what we are. And that what we realize for ourselves could in fact be very different from our biology. And so you see that? This self is now a very fluid concept. My friends, we did not get to this moment of madness overnight. This didn't just happen. We didn't just wake up. We didn't, as a Western culture, we didn't just all believe the right thing all the time for all these years and all of a sudden woke up in madness. The concept of the self and human nature got devolved over time, eroded away. And in both of these books, I tell you the story of where it started. We go back to Plato and Aristotle in the ancient world. And they were the ones that really had this idea of human nature and the self, and they rooted it in the soul, and then it's rooted in different things by different philosophers across time. But as it moves from being rooted in this thing to that thing to that thing to that thing, something about it dies off every time. And it's just a concept that has been eroded across time, such that I'm not actually surprised that the postmoderns would say that. As off-putting and immediately stunning as it is to us on first blush in our culture today, well, when you actually know the intellectual journey of that concept, you go, yeah, that's exactly where it's going to go. And what we're left with is where the self is a thing to be shaped, either by the power structures or by myself. Does that make sense? That's our moment that we're in. What we should do, they say, you'll recognize some of this, we throw off those structures. The church should be marginalized. See the cultural pressures. We should defund the police. Not trying to be political. That's where this is coming from. That's a power structure and all power structures, again, are corrupt. They're to be viewed with suspicion. It's funny, my kids are at the age now where we start to let them watch some shows. We did not do this a lot, but I'm kind of easing them into things. I mean, like my oldest are now in college. They can watch whatever so I'm kind of doing that thing, and okay, so they've seen a little bit of The Office now. They've seen a little bit of Parks and Rec now, and so they found Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I just told them, I said, look, I'm just going to tell you right now, funny as rip. Crude a lot of times, but funny as rip a lot until season 6 and 7. And notice this. There's another TV show that did the exact same thing and it didn't last long. What was the name of that show? It was the one about, it was sort of like a spoof off of Walmart. Remember that show? Superstore, yeah. Whereas the first season, that was kind of funny. Brooklyn Nine-Nine was funny. And then these comedies took this turn where all they wanted to do was political commentary on things. It just radically woke. And the humor's gone. Like you watch a TV show and it's like there was nothing in that show about anything other than Rosa's bisexuality and let's defund the police. And I'm like, have they forgotten why we want to watch these shows? Not because I need more political commentary in my life. Same thing with sports, by the way, right? It's the throwing off of all these cultural norms so that we can be free to do and be who we are. There's a deep suspicion that Western civilization is morally superior to African civilizations, Asian civilizations, and Arab civilizations. So in other words, what they're really rejecting here is this idea that the West has got it right, that the West is the king on the hill and all the other kinds of cultures out there are bad. Now look, let me be real clear about this. What I am and am not saying, or what I am and am not defending, I'm not here to defend that Western culture is always right. Heck no. The city on the hill, when we were enslaving people? No. When we were stealing land from Native Americans? No. I mean, I can think of lots and lots and lots of moments where the West is broken and defunct and dreadful. And I can think of plenty of other cases where other cultures get this thing or that thing right. So I'm not trying to say that the West is superior in all ways. But I would also fight to the death against the idea that all cultures are morally equal. I'm sorry, I'll say it. Iran, we don't hide weapons behind children. We don't hide our religious leaders behind women. We don't hide our bunkers underneath hospitals. That's what cowards do. That's what chickens do. Right? And I think we should say that kind of stuff. Are we better than them? Yes. Not spiritually. We're all sinners. But we lose the ability in a postmodern context to call balls and strikes. And my friends, we got to call balls and strikes. Right? We can't get into this idea that, well, we're all mutually equal. No. All these cultures are not equal. There are some cultures that are deeply problematic. There are some ideologies that are deeply destructive. There are, in fact, cultures and civilizations, both now and across time, where human beings don't flourish. Right? And think about the civil wars of Uganda, for example, or Nigeria. I mean, my goodness gracious, innocent people butchered and butchered and butchered. And I'm not saying that's everybody or everything, but that's problematic, And you, at least in principle, have not had that here, because there was this idea of justice and truth and fairness, which, by the way, came out of a Western context. A better way of saying that was a Christian worldview, right? And we don't need to decide, was America a Christian nation? That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, out of the Western world, which was predominantly characterized by Christian influence, things like natural science sprung up. Things like democracy sprung up, right? Those are good things. And they've been life-giving and people flourished in them. So, no, we don't want to say, on the one hand, that the West is always superior. No. At the same time, we're not going to say that all cultures are morally equal, because they're not, right? All right. Problems. And I just hit one of those right here. But let me just say this, human nature. So postmoderns have passionately and thoroughly rejected the concept of human nature and the self. Here again is a big illustration of big smack talk. No real argument. The one argument that they have in rejecting human nature are really two things. One, anytime a concept remains undecided across time for as long as it has, then it ends up being a murky concept that people will just throw away. That is generally true. So, for example, you go from Plato and Aristotle up through, say, Augustine and Aquinas, and then you get into John Locke and you get into David Hume with their psychological continuity models, their bundle theories of what human persons are. And I could dive into any of these details y'all want me to about these different views about what they've held. But anytime the concept just kind of keeps changing so often, eventually folks they just throw it off. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is, the postmodern will constantly argue that the concept of human nature was weaponized across time to hurt people, right? So go and look, here's an example of where there actually is some truth to that, okay? Think about slavery, for example. My name is James K. Dew Jr. I have a family who studied the Dew name. I have a descendant, Thomas Dew, who wrote the Theological defense for slavery. It is not a proud thing in our family, I'll tell you that, right? Obviously, I think that's heresy. I think that's abominable. And wish I could tell him to his face. But I can't. He's been dead a long, long time. But in that work and other works like it, the theological defense was African Americans aren't actually human. They're animals. And therefore there is no moral deficiency in the enslavement of them. So, do you see here how a concept of human nature gets weaponized against a whole people? Yeah, I can understand why people are going to distrust this. Again, the Michel Foucaults of the world said all people making knowledge claims are just power grabs. They're trying to control and manipulate the masses. The same could be true of, well, women. Think specifically about women's suffrage and all those types of things. Arguments being made that they are not necessarily not human, but just lesser in some ontological way. Right? And by ontological, I mean in the very fundamental nature of what and who they are. Well, clearly that's wrong. Again, go back to that. The only thing we get from the Bible about these imago Dei and likeness passages in Genesis 1 and 2 about what that could mean, we actually don't get in those passages any clue that what the imago Dei is some rational capacity or some relationship per se. The only real sense we get about what that could be is male-female, which means ontological equality here. So yes, we are complementarians. We do still believe that there are distinct roles and functions, but we don't think that that includes an ontological difference between the male and the female. Both are human nature. But all that to say, there have been plenty of people that weaponize the concept of human nature against females over history. And so you can see why people... Same thing with disabled folks. Same thing with Jews. Think about Hitler. I mean, what's Hitler doing? He's saying that there is a marked fundamental difference between the Aryan, the superior, and the Jew, the dog, right? He loved Paul's language in Philippians 3 there, right? He loved Martin Luther. Yeah, we like Martin Luther on a lot of things, but not this. He's an anti-Semite and says things that are unconscionable for a Christian to say. But anyway, yes, the concept of human nature has been weaponized. But now here's the problem with that argument, if that is an argument. Two things. Number one, rejecting a concept because it has been harmful is a bit like rejecting the existence of hammers because someone once picked one up and hit you with it. That it has been utilized in a harmful fashion doesn't mean that it's not there. You see that? So I don't think that's a real argument. Number two, the concept of human nature is so resilient. Listen, we're not talking about body, soul stuff in this talk, unless y'all bring it up later. But I mean, it's an important, and I wish we had time, but it's kind of a separate philosophical thing. So the idea called substance dualism, I will just say this. Substance dualism is the idea that we have body and soul. But watch this. This is the important part of it. Substance dualism is committed to that idea of body and soul, but substance dualism is more committed to the idea that while you have body and soul, you are the soul. Catch that? I, Jamie Dew, am the soul in a body. My relationship to my body is a relationship of possession. In the same way that I have, this is my shirt, not yours. This is my body, not yours. Inhabitants. I'm in my shirt, but I'm not my shirt. That's the relationship to your body. You have a body, but you're not your body. You are the soul. Does that make sense? All right, now look, that idea right there, that is what we call folk psychology. It is an intellectually robust idea and thought. Okay, there are lots of legitimate philosophers throughout history and today that hold this view. It's not quite the view I hold, but I call it folk psychology because this is the way the masses think. Not just Christians. You hear this at funerals, right? That's Granny's body. Granny's not there, Granny's up there. Right? You hear it at Christian services. This is what lost people on the road out there today who've never been to your church, they think this. Everybody thinks when you die, you go somewhere. But what is that thing going? It's that soul, which is rooting and grounding you. This is what Hindus believe. This is what Buddhists believe. This is what not just Plato, he's the one that introduces it into Western thought, but guess where Plato gets it? Plato is deeply influenced by Pythagoras. Plato is influenced by two sets of people in the pre-Socratic world, what we call the materialist, Heraclitus and Parmenides, that said reality is material in nature. And is there material stuff to reality? Seems so. I can see why they'd say that. But then he's also influenced by Pythagoras. You remember Pythagoras, right? Remember geometry? Yeah, that guy. He said, no, reality is not a material thing. Reality is a conceptual thing, a mental thing. Math, numbers. The number 2 is a real thing, right? It's not real in the same way that table's real. But 2's real, right? Try to get rid of it and watch what happens. Let's just say we could get rid of the number 2. 2 doesn't exist anymore. It's never written. It's never said anywhere in the universe. Nobody ever thinks it. Everywhere where 2 things show up, 2 eyes, 2 ears, you either take one away or add a third one. Everywhere. There is no instances of 2 anywhere in the world. Have we succeeded in getting rid of 2? No. Because 10 and 5 still exists. Right? So to get rid of 2, you'd actually got to get rid of 10 and 5. And actually, to get rid of 10 and 5, we have to get rid of numbers, period. There's no numbers whatsoever. Now, individual things like me's and you's don't exist. And by the way, go back to that table. This is Pythagoras' thought. Everything that exists in the material world can be represented with mathematical truths. It is a certain size, shape, dimension, weight, mass, thing, right? Pythagoras is saying, no, reality is a mental thing. And he brings that over into humanity by saying this mental, non-physical thing is not a material body, but a soul. Guess where Pythagoras gets this idea? Pythagoras gets this idea in India. He spends 20 years in India reading the Upanishads, which is essentially Hindu scriptures, and comes back to the West with this idea of the soul and the transmigration of the soul, reincarnation. And Plato picks this idea up, builds it into the Republic, and it becomes one of the most fundamental ideas in the Western world today. I'm telling you, globally, around the world, this is what people think. That there is, in fact, something more to me than just my material body, right? So here's what we do. We just let the postmoderns say their thing. We humor them. The idea of the self ain't going nowhere. It's not going anywhere. And so try as they might, they're not going to succeed here. All right, morality. Okay, a couple things. Rejection of all Judeo-Christian moral norms. That makes sense to you, I would assume. It is a difference, though, from modernity, though. Let me just say this. And there is a chapter in the book on this, Moral Apologetics book on this, if you want more on this. What's different from modernity to postmodernity on morality is, in modernity, they rejected our metaphysical views, our theological views, and our epistemological views. But modernity tried desperately to hang on to our moral teachings. They wanted the morality of Christianity. They just tried to come up with alternative ways of grounding those moral convictions without God. And one of the critiques I make here is that really possible? That's what the chapter in this book is about. It's about how those attempts by the atheist to ground moral concepts like goodness and stuff like that, they can't actually do it in ways that cash out in the right ways. We can't get from them what we'd actually need to have a real true morality. You can have some ways of talking about morality, but you can't actually have moral principles that are obligatory. And by the way, obligation, when we talk about morality and ethics, is the thing you actually got to get. It's not just enough to say I can make sense out of what this moral concept means. We have to make sense out of why I am, in fact, obliged to obey it. And I don't think you can actually do that without God, right? And so there's a whole long discussion there you could have about that. Now, watch this. This is important. Rejection of all Judeo-Christian moral norms, but it's the replacement of those norms with tribally distinct moral norms. Tribally distinct. The mistake people make, and they do kind of like with truth, right? Well, they don't believe in truth. Well, yeah, they do. People do the same thing. Well, they don't believe in morality. No. You have deeply misunderstood them. What they've rejected is our morality, the Christian morality, which is different from the moderns. They've now come full stop. Yes, no to our metaphysics, our epistemology, our theology, and our morality. That's what's new here. But they've simply replaced our moral systems with their own moral systems. They are not amoral, meaning no. They're not amoral. In fact, they are hypermoral. So much so, they have a moral system. And you better get in line with it. Hadn't this been the last 10 years for us? You better line up. If you don't line up, if you don't capitulate, if you don't affirm, no. If you don't celebrate, you're canceled, you're rejected, you're ridiculed. Quite frankly, nowadays, you might get assassinated. And I'm not trying to say that everything on the right is amazing. I'm not. But it is interesting that one side's shooting, right? You don't line up with this worldview. You don't say the right thing. You don't toe the line. And toe the line doesn't just mean that you will affirm. It means that you will celebrate it. If you don't celebrate it, then you will get pressure, right? So that's what's happened in our moment. They are hyper-moral. And by the way, here's where I can illustrate the tribal nature of this. Remember, postmodernism, they come in group hugs, this group and that group and that group. And so what started off, in our culture at least, say 25, 30, 40 years ago, is you had the L, the B, and the G, right? The lesbian, bi, and gay. And that was it. And then you get the LGBTQ and then plus, right? Now you get, they just stop adding letters, right? Because we could keep going forever. So they just say plus mark. That's literally what they're doing. Because all these other different kinds of things, they will rail. You'll hear this language. They will rail against your binaries. I swear, if I hear the word binary one more time. On or off, hot or cold, male or female. You and your binaries, your male and female types of things. And, biologically speaking, it seems fairly binary, right? But they will say, no, sexuality and gender is not, which, by the way, also, I would say this, and I fight this battle in the academic world, even with evangelicals. I think it is a mistake. I know that, and I'm not saying these people are liberal. They're not. I'm not saying they're not faithful evangelicals. They are. I'm not saying they're not faithful Southern Baptists. But personally, I'm not even comfortable with the distinction between sexuality and gender. I think that is a socially constructed thing that's been thrown at us by this world. Because and the reason I think that matters is, we'll talk about language in a minute. Folks, the moment you give them the language, you have given them the machinery that they need to do all this stuff. So I'm not even willing to do that. In my book, sexuality and gender is the exact same thing. Here, Jordan talks about in the book, he will note that we'll use these kind of interchangeably, just so you know, we think they're the same thing, right? Sexuality being, your biology, gender being what you identify as, and all that. So I'm not even going to make that distinction, right? So anyhow, this is the movement. But to illustrate the tribal nature of this, notice in our moment that movement, LGBTQ+, they don't all agree with each other, and they're starting to kind of consume themselves. They're turning on each other because the gay, lesbian, and bisexual community has said, that's not us. Wow, that's interesting. To sort of push back and say, this is, there's a sanity here that they're trying to preserve. We'll talk about how you interact with people in the second half. I'm just trying to give you the architecture philosophically of all these things. All right. I raised problems here about, can you actually be moral without God? I don't think that you can. Let's talk about language real quick and we'll be done with this section, okay? Language. Yeah. Did you know that language is a philosophical enterprise? I would have never known that prior to studying philosophy. But there are deep philosophical questions about language. Is a very strange thing, right? We make sounds, and sounds convey meaning. We put sounds in different arrangements, and it speaks volumes and conveys whole bits of information and conveys relationships are built on these sounds we make with each other. Think about how important communication is in a marriage or in any other type of relationship. It's all some kind of thing riding on this stuff called language. You and I can't actually even think. Cognition is dependent on language. Notice how a child's cognitive abilities begin to emerge right around the time that their linguistic capabilities begin to emerge. Notice the difference in a child in how they actually interact with you and eye contact with you and respond to you right around the time they can start saying things like mama, dada, and things like that. They can understand a whole lot more at this point, but that ability to even think rides on language. And language is this really funky thing. We actually don't even understand how it works completely, right? We have these things called idioms. Things like, you knocked my socks off. That doesn't mean that, right? It means like, you wowed me. Well, just say, you wowed me, right? Right? We have some speech act philosophers note the distinction between the locution, perlocution, and the illocution of language. So, for example, when I talk about these distinctions, take a statement like, the door is open. Well, there's different aspects of that statement there, right? So the door is open. I could just be simply observing a fact, and what the language actually says and means in that moment is that the door is open. But then that's not what I intend you to hear when I say that. I say things like, the door is open to my kids. What am I actually saying to them? Shut the door, right? And then there's what happens when I say that. They might look at me and like, do I have to get up? Oh, boy, you better get up, right? And they get up and they shut the door, right? Language can be used in different ways. Ludwig Wittgenstein in the 20th century talked about language games, right? Language, we thought for so long that language had this fixed meaning, this fixed, rigid, static relationship to reality, almost what we call sometimes a picture theory of language, that the word car, for example, is tied directly to those objects out in the parking lot. And that the word car always, always, always refers to those objects. There's this fixed relationship between that word and those objects out there. But actually, that's not the way it works at all. Actually, meaning in that language kind of has a lot to do with how you use it. Language becomes a bit like a tool, right? So I have tools. I love working out of my shed. Love it. Love it. If I'm home, I'm either making bullets in my shed or I'm building something in my shed. That's what I'm doing. I'm out there and I've got all these tools, and I find myself in every project I ever do, I've got these tools in my hands, but the tool I actually need is 20 feet over there. And you know what I do? I figure out how to do it with the tools I got in my hand, right? So take a screwdriver. What's a screwdriver for? Well, it's for screwdriving. Can you use it as a hammer? Yep. Right? I have a hammer in my hand. What's it for? Hammering. But can I use it to turn a bolt if I have to? Yep. Sure can. Notice that I can use these tools in a variety of ways. And Wittgenstein said that language does that in a lot of ways too. How the meaning of these sentences and these phrases in a large part has to do sometimes with how we utilize them, what you're doing with them. And here's the thing about games. Anybody play Settlers of Catan? Have you ever noticed when you teach somebody a new game, it's a new card game or a new board game or something like that? I've just learned, stop explaining it to them. Give them the absolute basics and then say, let's just play it one time. Because you can sit there and take 30 minutes explaining Settlers of Catan, and everybody's going to look at you like you're a Martian. And inevitably, what you do every single time is you say, let's just play one time. And you play the game one time, and then the new person to the game says, oh, I see. Let's play again for real. Right? Isn't that how you actually learn to play those games? Well, language is that way, right? Did your toddlers go to English class when they were 1? No. They were born into an arena where the game was being played. And mom and dad are saying things and utilizing language. And language that may literally mean door is open, but is intended and conveys a completely different meaning than the actual words that the meaning rides on. I'm telling you all, philosophy of language is, it's kind of fun. But the postmoderns have a lot to say here. And here's some of the things they say. Number one, they say language fails to transparently tell us of reality. It's filled with contradictions and bias. See, we take it, the common sense view of language is that when I say things like the car is red, that, well, my language is like this neutral tool that's not already filled with sort of bias and manipulation. And that the language, because it's neutral, can be utilized to successfully and accurately, transparently convey meaning about what's happening about there with the car. And that's how we tend to think about language. And the postmoderns say, no, remember, everything for them is of suspicion. Everything's skeptical, right? Language is not transparent in that way, they'd say. Language is filled with your biases and my biases, right? Filled with contradictions. So here's what that means. They'd say, we therefore, when an author or a speaker speaks to us and communicates to us via language, which is again how it all happens, and we think with this, we can never really trust what's being said as telling us the truth about the world. There's that skepticism, right? Now, add down there to that these real questions about where meaning comes from. Is meaning found, like say the car is red? Well, there's a subject and a predicate there, the car, subject, and the predicate is red. It's what I'm saying about, attributing back to the car. And now from that, the car, you have that in your head, is red. Ah, I got it. You're saying that object out there is red, right? Okay, so I convey, well, you understood that because those words in that sentence has meaning. Where does that meaning come from? There's a debate here. And by the way, this is a raging debate in biblical studies today. Is the meaning rooted in what we call the authorial intent? Me, the author of that sentence, whether I write it or speak it to you, I say the car is red. Does the meaning there come from me, the author? I'm intending you to pick up on that object and that truth about that object. Or is the meaning in the contextual, historical, grammatical, well, in the year 2026 in Alabama, we would be referring to those kinds of objects. You see what I'm saying? We do that a lot with the New Testament. Well, in the New Testament, in this period of time, we see that this word was used in this particular way. We kind of have to do that in this case because we don't have the authors right there to tell us. It's called a historical grammatical approach. Here's the postmodern view. They would say no. And what they'd say is meaning is rooted in you, the reader. And you cannot trust what's being said. You never can know the authorial intent. You can't know the historical grammatical. All language is filled with bias and manipulation. Remember, they're power grabs. They're trying to control you. We view everything with suspicion. So what that means is meaning now can only come from one other place, and that's you reading a text, you hearing a speaker. And this is where that language comes from. Well, to me it means this, right? Sound familiar? I know that's an intellectual journey to get to that spot. But you've heard that, right? You hear that in our world. I'm telling you, this is where it comes from, okay? The meaning, well, I think it means this. So how do you critique this? I'll give you one little critique here. I actually think it's a very powerful critique. Postmoderns, I don't ever like to be snarky if I can help it. But sometimes the appropriate thing is snark. They're hypocrites. They're absolute flaming, obnoxious hypocrites. They say all this stuff. They say it in books. And they expect you and me to apply this hermeneutic of suspicion to anybody else's books. They're going to apply it to my books. However, when they speak, however, I shouldn't just do this authorial or this reader-centric approach. They can actually speak to me in sentences. They write to me in paragraphs and pages, and they assume that I'm picking up what they're laying down. And it's almost like, you remember that scene in The Office where Dwight is shunning Andy? Remember this? Andy, I don't even remember what Andy did, but Dwight in his very German, almost Mennonite type of disposition, they shun people. And so he shuns Andy. And Andy asks him a question, and Dwight just can't help himself. He has to answer the question. He goes, unshun, and he answers the question. shun. And then Andy says something else. He goes, unshun, shun. And he does that. And he does that like 5-6 times, and Dwight just looks ridiculous. And quite frankly, I think that's what they're doing here. It's like, here are the rules. They don't apply to what I'm saying, though, because this will successfully convey. Now, shun. Anything else said, you ask a question, they want to answer it, unshun. And it's just like, man, come on. If I take what you say literally, then I should not take anything you say literally. Notice, I might not know. There's a whole bunch of cool things in philosophy. I'll end with this. There's a whole bunch of cool things in philosophy. There's a whole lot of things I actually don't know. About things like, what does it mean to know something versus merely believe something? There's actually a very long history in philosophy about the definition of knowledge and such. And the predominant definition for 2,000 years in 1963 got undone with a 3-page journal article. And as such, the traditional definition of knowledge, we go, I don't know that that's getting everything to it. What would you add, Jamie? Or any other epistemologist, we'd go, I don't know. I might not be able to fully define what it is, but I know when I know something, right? Same thing here on language. I don't actually know exactly how language works. But I do know this. If I ask my son Samuel to get up and go get me a popsicle, that little dude gets up and goes and gets me a popsicle. And my language succeeds in conveying to people exactly what I want it to convey, right? It's a mystery sometimes how it works, but it works. And so I think that's a problem for postmodernism, because on their view, language shouldn't work at all. We should have no trust in it at all. And yet we pull off all kinds of things on it. All right? All right, real quick, 5 more minute break, real quick. We're going to come back and I'm going to deal with some of these other things real quick, okay?